As we think of this hard market, construction has a lot of fleets.
Yes.
So they have a lot of equipment and especially like vehicles that move in and out of the places that we live and work in.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me more about fleet management programs?
Yeah, that's a good point because we mentioned earlier, commercial auto is probably easily, I would say, probably the worst market to try to get insurance in right now. And especially if you have a large fleet of like heavy power units, like ready-mix trucks, or you see those big cherry pickers, like for electrical subcontractors who are doing wiring, like for the, the wire electricity poles, telephone poles, whatever, putting wires up. That's a bigger piece of equipment. So that's a big thing. And so, and then as I mentioned before, we're just seeing this dramatic spike in, we call these, nuclear verdicts where the premiums, like the loss is not just the $1 million that might be your liability, but it goes into the umbrella, $5, $10, $20 million. That can be devastating for an insurance company. And so, we talked about rates are going up. It's very expensive. So what's happening is that, the insurance world and working with construction firms, and try and adapt to a lot of technology to try to mitigate or reduce some of these exposures. And what some insurance companies are requiring, or even what some smart, general contractors, subcontractors, and large fleets are doing, is trying to adapt some technology. A couple of things that you can do. One is like we call telemetrics, and it looks like almost like a small, half the size of your cell phone, and you plug it into like the computer diagnostic port in your car, like when you go get your car tested in the mechanic. Kind of sits in there, and that the purpose of that is to track, velocity, hard braking, that kind of thing. And that whole is just like, keep an eye on your employees, try to red flag anyone who's driving too hard, braking too hard, and as a result, try to track and therefore to be proactive and making sure your employees are being defensive drivers, and they maybe reward those guys who are doing great and penalize those guys who are doing poorly. So that's one way you kind of do things. Another thing that you've been seeing more and more of is cameras being installed in the trucks, where, like I said, the camera's pointing outward so they monitoring what's going on in front of you. So in case if something happens and it gets disputed, hopefully your guy did anything wrong, you got the video component to watch it. And there's also technology happening where the video is going back inside into the cab, watching the driver. And so then again, you're trying to demonstrate whether or not, hey, my guy was not being distracted, he was being a good driver. But there's also some firms that have adopted AI, where if it shows that your driver doesn't have his safety belt on, it's like a beep and it's a warning, and it's recording this to get the person to get their safety belt on. So now I do know risk managers who like that, but I also know risk managers who don't like that because they feel like, it could cut both ways. You could help prove that you did nothing wrong, but also could prove that your drivers did something wrong. So it's just like anything else. You got to think twice about the tools and the systems that you're going to use, but also maximize their benefit and don't just take it lightly.
Yeah. Safety is really important, especially with fleets, because of the frequency of accidents.
Correct.
So I'm guessing that frequency combined with things like interest rates, it now costs more to replace the same asset, are some of the pressures that are driving automobile insurance claims.
Yeah. And then like part of that too is just like, say you think about what kind of car you drive. Most newer cars have the parking sensors on the front and back of your bumper, just like your normal car. That's pretty expensive. So I'm like, it's a small little fender bender, easily $2,000, $3,000 to replace that bumper, because it's not just the plastic or you can replace, it's all the diagnostics, the sensors that have to be replaced as well.
So if you were advising a contractor today who is considering purchasing a fleet and insuring it, what would be your message to them today? What are things they should be thinking about and doing?
That's a good question. Well, the first thing is, and this gonna sound stupid, just make it down to the basics. One, make sure your drivers have a driver's license. I mean, that might sound stupid, but you'd be surprised how many people drive around, people get hired that don't have a driver's license. Two, regularly, if not, once a year, if not more than that, run the background checks as far as the driver records of your drivers. You want to maybe do that before you hire them, but also make sure that during the course of their employment there, they're not having speeding tickets and, crashes all the time, because you want to make sure you've got the right people hired, employed by you. And if they haven't gotten problems, you got to want to be in front of it, mitigate it, train them, make sure they know what they're doing. Two, this is going to sound kind of strange, but there are some studies that show that a lot of times in construction or fleet, you want to, like, say you get a brand new truck and you want to have that truck to have your logo on it and advertise who you are. Maybe for a purpose like, I want to get business for my firm. There are studies that indicate that if rather than having advertising on your truck, you just have a plain white truck, you are less likely to get pulled into a severe lawsuit because it goes back to the point. There's this motive or idea. If someone gets in an accident, you see it's a commercial insurance company. Well, you know they got insurance. I'm going to go sue. If it's just a white truck, it's not necessarily inherent that they're a commercial truck, and therefore you may not have that quick response to try to do a suit. So that's a mitigation as well. Obviously, taking into account maintenance, proper maintenance on the truck, making sure that the brakes are being done and updated, because like anything else, you just drive your personal cars, you want good brakes, you want to make sure it performs and it'll respond properly. And then there's also things that you try to be creative in respects to, if insurance rates are expensive for you, but you think your losses are good, one thing you might want to try to do is like have a higher deductible, where rather than paying a guaranteed cost with like a $500 deductible per claim, you might want a larger deductible where it's say $100,000, $150,000. You're retaining more of that risk. You're putting more on yourself. But with doing the higher deductible, you should get lower, should be and will be getting lower premiums for the auto carriers. And then another option that we've seen a lot of interest in is that rather than just waiting upon the standard market forces of the general insurance world, and you're subcontractor, general contractor, you got a lot of trucks and fleet, and hey man, my guys are doing well. I have no losses, but my rates keep going up and up. One thing you might want to think about doing is either going to exploring a captive. Captives are basically your own insurance companies. You could do a group captive where it's you and a bunch of other people in the same industry, or maybe different industries that's homogeneous or heterogeneous. Or if you're big enough, which are firms like I used to work with, you just have your own captive, your own insurance company. So that way you're retaining more of that risk, but if you do it properly, you can save money. It grows. It goes in the captive. It grows. Therefore, you have a larger reserve to pay for claims. And again, if I tell people going into a captive it's not to be taken lightly. You really need to understand that you're retaining your risk. You're more out of pocket. Any claims occur, so you want to make sure your health and safety and your training records and your people really are in for the long haul, and they drink the Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term, because I tell people it's like going to a captive. It's easy. It's like the mob. It's easy to go in, but it's really hard to get out. So.